Beneath the city streets, while bombs exploded and governments changed above, the catacombs offered refuge, concealment, and strategic advantage. For hundreds of years, they have played a role in Paris's history of war, silent, secret, and vital. During the French Revolution, bones were still being moved below ground, but the tunnels were already serving more than just as a burial place. As the guillotine took lives during the day, the catacombs took in the growing number of remains. 2. Once a place for the dead, the catacombs have developed their own legends, which continue to grow with each mysterious sound in the darkness. One of the most well-known stories is that of the Phantom of the Catacombs. Some believe he was a quarryman who died long ago after getting lost, and now roams the tunnels, his footsteps audible but never visible. Others say he was a plague victim, doomed to wander the underground forever in search of his lost family among the 6 million skulls. Whether a spirit or a symbol, both visitors and explorers have reported hearing ghostly whispers, feeling sudden chills, and experiencing unexplained nausea in certain areas of the tunnels. Nevertheless, the catacombs remain a subject of debate. Critics say that turning mass graves into tourist spots is disrespectful, reducing once living people to mere decorations. Others note that many visitors don't fully understand what they're looking at. These aren't props, but actual people who once had names, faces, and families, now reduced to anonymous remains from a forgotten past. Still, the catacombs play an important role. They remind us of the scale, the countless lives that came before us. They quite literally form the foundation of Paris, the dead supporting the living. Bones that once carried bread, books, or joined revolutions now uphold the city's legends and streets. Yet oddly enough, as soon as you climb the staircase... Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the disastrous legacies and questionable parenting choices of some of the worst fathers in medieval history, men who really should have come with warning signs. Before we get started, make sure to like the video and subscribe if you actually enjoy this kind of content, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing how far this audience reaches. Now lower the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a bit of background noise, and let's settle in. You probably know King John as the villain in every version of Robin Hood, but what you might not know is that he was also a strong contender for the title of most emotionally unavailable father of the 13th century. That's a big deal in an era when parenting mainly meant yelling and marrying your kid off before they could grow a mustache. John became king in 1199 and within weeks managed to alienate almost everyone: barons, nobles, the Pope, his mother, and eventually his own children. His parenting legacy is a chaotic blend of neglect, selfishness, and the occasional murder. Take the story of his nephew, Arthur of Brittany. Arthur had a claim to the throne, and John had serious anger issues. So he captured the teen and supposedly starved him to death in a dungeon. Parenting tip: if your idea of handling family drama involves torture, you've probably gone too far. But John didn't just mistreat extended family. His own son, Henry III, inherited a kingdom that was basically the medieval version of a dumpster fire. And to top it off, John locked up Henry's mother, his own wife, for nearly 10 years, because nothing says healthy home life like imprisoning your spouse while you're off losing wars. John taxed the nobles until they rebelled, lost nearly all of England's French territories in one disastrous campaign, and was eventually forced to sign the Magna Carta, which he promptly ignored. because apparently laws were beneath him. To the public, John was a tyrant. To his kids, he was an angry landlord with a crown. He wasn't wise or supportive. At best, he was the kind of dad who missed your birthday because he was off losing Normandy again. When it comes to terrible medieval dads, John didn't just drop the ball, he threw it off a cliff. And then there's Ivan the Terrible, who didn't just fail at parenting, he created a whole new level of terrible. As the first Tsar of all Russia in the 1500s, Ivan started out looking like a decent ruler, ambitious, reform-minded, and with a solid public image. But by the time his kids could talk, he'd entered full-blown paranoid tyrant mode. That meant mass killings, a secret police force, and what modern psychologists might call extreme trust issues. He had several children, but his relationship with his eldest son, also named Ivan, was a train wreck of epic proportions, the kind of dynamic that would rack up modern therapy bills like they were going out of style. The two had a notoriously strained relationship. The younger Ivan was intelligent, capable, and well-liked, traits that made Ivan the Terrible view him with deep suspicion. In 1581, things reached a deadly climax when father and son had a fierce argument. It began after Ivan the Terrible violently assaulted his pregnant daughter-in-law, the younger Ivan's wife, for supposedly dressing inappropriately, that is, for existing without his royal approval. The younger Ivan stood up to him. Harsh words were spoken, tempers flared. Then, in typical excessive fashion, his biggest failure as a parent, however, was his obsessive mission to destroy his half-brother, Henry of Trastamara. Instead of following the typical medieval fatherly approach, ignoring their brothers and getting drunk, Peter chose actual war. He accused Henry of treason, conspiracies, and even blamed him for cosmic misfortunes, and he didn't stop at insults. In a disastrous family reunion, Peter personally stabbed another half-brother, Fadri, during what was supposed to be a peacemaking meeting. "Let's hug it out" apparently meant, "let me hug you with a sword." Basil constantly belittled Leo, openly challenged his right to rule, and turned every father-son moment into a medieval version of a paternity drama. When Leo tried to pursue philosophy, Basil outlawed books. When Leo displayed leadership qualities, Basil reacted by jailing his friends and treating him like a rival instead of his son. To make matters worse, Basil had Leo's closest advisor tortured just to make a point, namely, "I'm unfit to be a parent." Basil's reign ended when he died in a bizarre hunting accident involving a stag. Philip publicly humiliated his sons' wives and didn't spare his sons from criticism either. The scandal damaged the royal reputation, and Philip reacted by shutting down emotionally and focusing obsessively on his coinage reforms. He never restored trust within his family or repaired the damaged marriages. Instead, he just became more controlling and stern. Typical Philip. Ultimately, all three of his sons briefly became kings, but their reigns were largely disastrous. It seems that raising future rulers in a cold, loveless royal environment didn't turn out well. Sometimes the worst father isn't the cruel one, it's the one who's simply absent. Edward I of England, known as Longshanks, was a father who valued strictness, conquest, and no affection whatsoever. He was tall, imposing, and frightening in the uniquely terrifying way only a medieval king with a bad temper and a sharp sword could be. He's remembered for two main things: building castles and crushing nations. He conquered Wales, fought wars in Scotland, and expelled the Jews from England. He became the King of Bohemia in 1310 through marriage and had several children, the most well-known being Charles IV, the future Holy Roman Emperor. It's surprising Charles turned out well, considering his upbringing under John of Bohemia, which was like growing up in a chaotic game of Risk. John spent little time in Bohemia and showed minimal interest in ruling it. Instead, he preferred riding around Europe on military campaigns, sometimes for honor, sometimes for politics, and sometimes just for the thrill of it. He delegated his responsibilities and left his children behind, with young Charles being raised by others, while John kept busy with jousting and warfare. During one battle, Robert knocked his father off his horse and injured him before realizing who he was. William was absolutely furious, not because he was hurt, but because getting unhorsed by your own son was deeply humiliating. Though he eventually forgave Robert, he never fully trusted him again. William ended up dividing his lands in an awkward way. Robert got Normandy, his second son William Rufus got England, and the rest of the family received bits of land and lasting emotional wounds. This division led to decades of civil war, with brothers turning against each other. Alonso XI of Castile, a skilled military leader in the 14th century, was known for his effectiveness on the battlefield, especially against Muslim forces in the Reconquista. However, his personal life, particularly as a father, was a different story. Although Alonso married Maria of Portugal for political reasons to strengthen Iberian alliances, he had little interest in her. Instead, he was deeply involved with Leonor of Guzman, a noblewoman who became his mistress, confidant, and eventually the mother of 10 of his children. He loved his mistress, doted on his illegitimate sons, and left his rightful heir with nothing but bitterness and a looming civil war. A powerful ruler, yes, but as a father, Alfonso scores top marks for flair, 0 for wisdom, and earns a lifetime pass to medieval family feuds. Richard the Lionheart is another king who got more fame than fatherhood. Crowned King of England in 1189, he became a legend for his part in the Third Crusade, known for strength, sword fights, and striking horseback poses. Sadly, while Richard was off chasing glory so what did he do? Encourage him, prepare him for leadership? Of course not, he isolated him. Charles was raised away from the court, kept under constant watch, and given just enough education to read royal decrees, but not enough to write his own. Louis didn't want a successor. He wanted a puppet, one who wouldn't ask too many questions. He forbade Charles from making any political decisions and frequently changed his household staff to prevent them from getting too close. At one point, Louis even thought about disinheriting him simply for talking back. Classic family bonding. And when Louis got sick, His legacy as a father was a mix of charm, irresponsibility, and a vague sense of aristocratic arrogance. He ruled during a time of recovery, scandal, and indulgence. His parenting style reflected this, excessive, showy, and deeply neglectful. Louis XIV didn't just rule France, he became its symbol. Known as the Sun King, he transformed himself into a living god, dazzling Europe in silk heels. He shone at the heart of Europe, with everyone around him orbiting cautiously, often in powdered wigs. His reign lasted 72 years, making him the longest reigning monarch in European history. That's a long time to build an empire, control the nobility, and most importantly, mess up his kids. Louis had one legitimate son, the Grand Dauphin, and at least 16 illegitimate children with various mistresses. He later legitimized many of them because why not hand out titles like party favors? Louis wasn't an absent father. He was ever present, hovering and controlling everything. Think less dad reading bedtime stories and more dad assigning your political alliances before your voice even changes. The Grand Dauphin, Louis's only legitimate son, it was a matter of survival. The success of crops, harvests, irrigation, and even the existence of cities along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers relied on how accurately ancient people could interpret the sky. Babylonian priests called Bu acted as early weather forecasters. Their version of a weather app was the sky itself, and their data was recorded on clay tablets. Thousands of these cuneiform tablets, discovered in ancient cities like Nineveh and Babylon, contain weather omens, sky observations, and detailed records passed down through generations. These weren't just general predictions, they carefully recorded what occurred when certain cloud patterns appeared or when lightning struck on specific days. For example, clouds forming in the west might signal an upcoming flood, thunder from the north could predict war, red skies at sunset might suggest divine anger or a warning of poor harvests. Even a brightly shining crescent moon wasn't just beautiful, it had meaning. Every year, just before sunrise, Sirius would rise on the eastern horizon, appearing right before the sun. To the Egyptians, this wasn't just a stunning view, it was a cosmic signal. Within days of its rise, the Nile would begin to flood. This discovery wasn't by chance. Egyptian priests called Hour Watchers had spent centuries observing Sirius and other stars from their temple observatories. They used tall columns with shadow markings, water clocks, and handheld tools to measure time and the positions of the stars. Their focus wasn't theoretical astronomy, but practical agriculture, as people's lives relied on it. These cloud-like shapes weren't made of stars, but of interstellar dust, and Andean sky watchers believed their patterns predicted rainfall. A large llama shape in the sky indicated abundant water, while a faint or distorted shape signaled a coming drought. They also observed the snow levels on nearby mountains. If the snow melted too quickly, it could point to a dangerously dry season. If it stayed longer than usual, it could mean flooding. The Andean worldview was rooted in the idea of reciprocity with nature. You didn't control the weather, but you negotiated with it. Ceremonies and offerings, such as pagos a la tierra, earth payments, were performed to appease the spirits that controlled the weather. Timing was crucial. Planting corn and potatoes depended on exact seasonal cues. A few weeks off could mean the crops would either freeze or rot. For Andean farmers, precision mattered more than yield. It was the difference between having enough to eat and facing famine. So while the Babylonians read clouds and the Egyptians observed stars, the Andean people looked to animals, shadows, and sacred mountains. Their tools were different, but their goal was the same: survival in a world where the skies determined your fate, and the earth was always communicating if you knew how to listen. In ancient China, weather was seen as more than a natural event. It reflected cosmic harmony. The emperor wasn't just a ruler, he was the son of heaven, responsible for maintaining balance between the earth and the celestial forces. If the weather took an unexpected turn, it wasn't just a stroke of bad luck. It was a sign that something spiritually was out of balance. The consequences were both agricultural and political. Chinese weather prediction combined natural observation with philosophical cosmology. This system started with the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and the belief that these forces interacted with yin and yang energies, influencing everything, including the weather. A drought wasn't just dry weather, it indicated an imbalance in the water element, while a sudden storm could signal an excess of yang energy. But the Chinese didn't just theorize, they observed. Court astronomers and scholars meticulously tracked patterns in wind direction, cloud formations, temperatures, and rainfall. These records date back as far as the Shang dynasty, around 1600 BCE, when oracle bones were used to predict both royal matters and weather patterns. Tortoise shells were heated until they cracked, and the resulting lines were interpreted to forecast rain or storms. Clouds held particular significance. The ancient Chinese did not classify them as cumulus or cirrus, but saw them as signs of celestial dragons. Dragons symbolized water and weather forces, especially rain. A curling, snake-like cloud in the east was considered a sign of good luck and impending rain. In contrast, red clouds at sunset were often viewed as warnings of war or turmoil. It provided practical knowledge to farmers, telling them when to plant, harvest, and what signs to watch for. For example, the migration of cranes signaled the approach of winter, and the early rise of Orion indicated it was time to prune vines. The Greeks also closely monitored wind patterns, particularly sailors who relied on the Asian winds, predictable summer winds in the Iron, to plan voyages. Harbours, trade routes, and even temples were designed around these patterns. This kind of empirical, experience-based knowledge existed alongside more philosophical ideas. Omens still held significance, especially among rural communities. A howling dog at night or a ring around the moon could still unnerve a farmer. However, compared to their neighbours, the Greeks took a bold step forward, believing that nature could be studied rather than simply worshipped. In ancient India, weather prediction was less about observing clouds and more about understanding large, cyclical forces. The subcontinent's agriculture relied heavily on the monsoon, and any deviation from its expected timing or intensity could cause crop failures or floods. Monsoon forecasting involved the use of solar and lunar calendars, studying planetary alignments, and observing the sky over long periods to detect patterns. The aim was not just to predict the weather, but to live in harmony with it. Activities like agriculture, temple building, festivals, and even royal decisions were often aligned with these seasonal observations. Across North America's diverse landscapes, indigenous peoples developed highly localized weather prediction systems long before European settlers introduced barometers. From the Arctic tundra to plains, deserts, and coastal forests, Native American tribes tuned into their environment with remarkable accuracy. For them, forecasting was a matter of survival. Each tribe had its own unique system, tailored to its specific surroundings. These ocean travelers didn't just forecast the weather for farming, they did it while journeying thousands of miles across the sea in open canoes without instruments, maps, or a written language. How did they manage? They interpreted the ocean as if it were a book. Polynesian navigators, known as wayfinders, were trained from a young age to detect subtle shifts in wind direction, changes in wave patterns, cloud formations, and even the movements of seabirds. An experienced navigator could sense an approaching storm not by seeing dark skies or hearing thunder, but by noticing a slight change in the rhythm of the swells beneath the canoe. A shift in the smell of the air or the hue of the horizon could signal a coming squall. Clouds also served as vital indicators. Beneath the city, as bombs exploded and governments changed above, the catacombs offered refuge, concealment, and a tactical advantage. For hundreds of years, they have played a crucial role in Paris's military history. Silent, hidden and vital. During the French Revolution, bones were still being moved below ground, but the tunnels had begun to serve a greater purpose. While the guillotine took lives during the day, the catacombs took in the growing number of bodies at night. Stories spread that revolutionaries, a term that made traditionalists uneasy. This wasn't a temporary emergency solution, it was permanent, and that posed a problem. Once back in control, Caesar began to reshape the state. He expanded the Senate but filled it with his supporters. He reduced debts, reformed the calendar into the Julian system, and granted citizenship to foreigners. He acted swiftly and decisively, cutting through the old bureaucracy like a sharp knife. To the common people, he was a hero. To the Senate elite, a looming threat. They watched nervously as Caesar paraded through Rome in a purple toga, a color only for royalty. They scowled when he sat alone in a golden chair at the front of the Senate. Statues were erected, coins were minted with his face, and priests declared him a living god. At a public event, Mark Antony even offered him a crown. Caesar declined, but only after a dramatic pause. To his foes, the signs were unmistakable. Julius Caesar wasn't just centralizing power, he was preparing the way for monarchy. Rome had ousted kings nearly 5 centuries earlier. And now, with each passing day, it seemed like the Republic was on the verge of transforming into something darker, crowned and irreversible. While Caesar reveled in glory, his enemies were sharpening their knives, initially metaphorically, then literally, in the marble halls of Rome. If Brutus joined the conspiracy, it wouldn't be seen as treason, it would be seen as tradition. But first, Brutus was unsure. Caesar had pardoned him for supporting Pompey during the Civil War and had even come to treat him like a son. But that closeness only made Brutus's inner struggle more intense. Was his loyalty to Caesar more important than his loyalty to Rome? Cassius skillfully exploited that conflict using praise, reasoning, and just enough guilt to sway him. By early March, the core group of conspirators had grown to over 60 senators, including some who had once been close to Caesar. He assured Caesar that the Senate was prepared to offer more honors and that skipping the session would appear cowardly or arrogant. Caesar, always mindful of his image, gave in. Accompanied by a small group, he walked through the forum toward the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was temporarily meeting. He received a note warning him of the plot, but he never read it. Unknowingly, he was walking to his death, as nearly every senator in the chamber was armed with a dagger hidden under their toga. When Caesar entered, the conspirators acted. They surrounded him, pretending to present a petition. Lucius Tillius Cimber was the first to strike, yanking Caesar's toga down. This was the signal. The first knife, wielded by Servilius Cassa, missed its mark. Caesar allegedly exclaimed, "Caesar, you villain, what are you doing?" Before realizing, the attack wasn't isolated but part of a larger ambush. More knives followed. Senators surrounded him, stabbing recklessly, sometimes hitting one another. The violence escalated quickly. In total, Caesar was stabbed 23 times, with only one wound, probably to the chest, being fatal. It's rumored he did not resist after seeing Brutus among his attackers. His supposed final words, "Et tu, Bruti," have become legendary, though ancient sources disagree on whether he said anything at all. Some say he simply covered his face with his toga in quiet dignity. When the bloodshed stopped, Caesar lay dead at the foot of a statue of his former rival, Pompey the Great. It was a strange irony. The supposed tyrant had been killed, the Republic had been avenged. Or So the conspirators believed. When Caesar's body hit the Senate floor, they expected applause, celebration, and perhaps even statues in their honor. Instead, they were met with confusion. As Caesar's lifeless body lay beneath Pompey's statue, the chamber fell silent, then erupted into chaos. Some senators fled, terrified of becoming the next targets. Others remained frozen, uncertain whether to mourn or cheer. The assassins, still holding their daggers, raised their bloodied hands, declaring they had freed Rome from tyranny. Outside the chamber, the reaction was much colder and far more perilous. The Roman people loved Caesar. He was the one who fed, entertained, and promised them land and citizenship. He wasn't just a ruler, but a populist icon. Now a group of elites, many of whom had benefited from his rule, had killed him in broad daylight. There was no trial, no ceremony, just knives and betrayal. When the conspirators emerged, they expected cheers, but were met with hostile looks and murmured threats. Even Caesar's enemies were unsure how to react. The Republicans lacked a clear plan for the future. There was no successor, no council to govern, just a power vacuum. In the hours after the murder, the conspirators fled to Capitol Hill, fearing retaliation. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul and loyal supporter, moved quickly to stabilize the situation. Though he knew of the tensions, he wasn't involved in the conspiracy and now held one of the most powerful offices in Rome. Antony negotiated a fragile peace. The Senate would not punish the conspirators, and Caesar's laws and appointments would remain in place. This compromise was meant to avoid civil war, but it did not calm the people. It only delayed an explosion. Caesar's will was revealed, containing shocking news. He had posthumously adopted his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, as his heir. Even more provocatively, Caesar had left generous gifts for the Roman citizens. The people mourned, the assassins had no plan, and two ambitious men, Antony and Octavian, were now set to turn Caesar's death into a political weapon. The Ides of March had killed a man, but it had also unleashed a far more dangerous power struggle that would tear Rome apart. If Caesar's assassination had shocked the Roman people, his funeral set them on fire. Just days after the Ides of March, the city gathered in the Forum to mourn their fallen leader. Caesar's body lay in a gilded coffin draped in purple and gold, displayed in front of the temple of Venus Genetrix, his claimed divine ancestor. Mark Antony, now positioning himself as Caesar's political heir, stepped forward to deliver one of the most famous speeches in Roman history. Antony's actions were anything but subtle. He didn't simply grieve for Caesar, he made a spectacle of his sorrow. He read Caesar's will to the crowd, revealing that Caesar had left each Roman citizen a generous gift of 300 sesterces and access to large public gardens from his personal property. The crowd was shocked. Even in death, Caesar was taking care of them. Even in death, he proved himself a man of the people. Then Antony escalated the moment. He raised Caesar's bloodied toga, ripped it open to show the stab wounds, and pointed to each one as if accusing the killers of treason. According to some ancient accounts, he even displayed Caesar's body, transforming the funeral into a violent spectacle. When the news of the murder reached him, he reacted with remarkable speed and decisiveness. Ignoring warnings to stay safe, he sailed directly to Italy and headed for Rome, not as a general, but as the son of Caesar, not legally yet, but emotionally and politically. He immediately adopted the Caesar legacy. Upon arriving in Rome, he began calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, highlighting his connection to the murdered dictator. He didn't hold power, but having the name was enough to make people uneasy. Octavian's first move was to claim the 300 million sesterces left to him by Caesar in the will. Meanwhile, Mark Antony was deliberately delaying the release of the funds. The Senate, still rattled by Antony's dramatic behavior at Caesar's funeral, began to view Octavian as a potential rival. The catacombs, once a resting place for the dead, have developed their own folklore, which grows with every mysterious sound in the darkness. One of the most well-known legends is that of the Phantom of the Catacombs. Some believe it's the ghost of a quarryman who died long ago after getting lost in the tunnels, with only the sound of his footsteps heard, but never his figure seen. Others say it's the spirit of a plague victim, doomed to endlessly search the tunnels for his lost family among the 6 million skulls. Whether real ghost or symbolic tale, both tourists and explorers have reported hearing whispers, feeling sudden chills, and experiencing nausea in certain areas, especially near the untouched, older quarries. Another famous story is that of the camcorder tape. In the early 1990s, a group of catacomb explorers allegedly discovered a video camera deep in a restricted area. The footage, later shown on French TV, revealed a man walking alone in the tunnels, growing more terrified, running, spinning, and completely lost. Eventually, the man drops the camera, and his identity remains unknown. Small beer usually had an alcohol content of about 1 to 2%, enough to kill bacteria, but not enough to spark a bar fight before breakfast. Still, drinking too much on an empty stomach could leave you a little unsteady. While peasants drank weak ale to avoid getting sick from dirty water, monks took a more sophisticated approach, essentially inventing medieval craft beer. Between chanting, copying texts, and dealing with their vow of celibacy, monks became Europe's original master brewers. They didn't just dabble, they ran full-scale brewing operations within their monasteries, and they were excellent at it. Why monks? Monasteries were clean, orderly places filled with educated men who had access to large pots and plenty of time. Brewing became as routine as praying, fasting, and quietly criticizing each other's handwriting. Monks brewed for guests, pilgrims, charity, and themselves. It's safe to assume Brother Pius snuck in a drink or two between prayer sessions. Unlike peasants who guessed their way through brewing, monks kept detailed records. They measured ingredients, timed fermentation, and even introduced hops. Yes, the same plant that gives beer its bitter taste and makes your IPA obsession feel classy. While common folk drank weak beer, monks brewed stronger versions. Why? Because they could. And because during fasting, solid food was off limits, but beer wasn't. This clever loophole led to liquid bread, a nourishing, flavorful alcoholic substitute for meals. Some monasteries became so skilled at brewing that their beer gained regional fame. People often visited abbeys more for the beer than spiritual reasons. By the 14th century, many monasteries were operating like modern microbreweries, only instead of a flannel-clad guy named Chad, it was Brother Gregory with a shaved head and expert brewing logs. He was told that the Senate was prepared to grant him even more honors, and that not attending the session would appear either cowardly or arrogant. Being highly aware of his public image, Caesar agreed. Accompanied by a small group, he walked through the forum toward the theater of Pom, where the Senate was temporarily meeting. A note was given to him, warning of the plot, but he did not read it. He was unknowingly walking into his own death, oblivious to the fact that nearly every senator in the room had hidden a dagger beneath their toga. When Caesar entered the Senate, the Matsudaira found themselves trapped between two powerful and ambitious neighbors, the Oda clan to the west and the Imagawa clan to the east. Lacking the strength to stand alone, Titio's family made the harsh choice to seek protection through submission. At just 6 years old, the boy was sent as a political hostage to the Imagawa, a living pledge of loyalty. But fate took a cruel turn. While on the way to the Imagawa court, the Oda intercepted the caravan and captured the boy. For the next 2 years, young Tatsuo lived under the authority of Oda Nobuhide, father of the future warlord Oda Nobunaga. Though he was treated with a degree of care, he remained a prisoner, a bargaining chip. Motoyasu's territory in Mikawa was technically under Imagawa control, but he maintained connections with local retainers and vassals who desired independence. As always, Motoyasu waited patiently. His chance came in 1560 during the Battle of Okehazama. Imagawa Yoshimoto, confident in his growing strength, launched an ambitious campaign westward to conquer Oda lands. The Imagawa army advanced with arrogance, expecting an easy win. But the young and relatively unknown Oda Nobunaga launched a surprise attack during a thunderstorm, killing Yoshimoto and decimating his forces. The result was a major shock. The Imagawa leadership collapsed overnight, leaving their vassals, including Motoyasu, without guidance and exposed. Instead of panicking, Motoyasu took action. He seized Okazaki Castle, his ancestral home, and quietly declared independence. He returned to Mikawa not as a hostage, but as an emerging daimyo. This marked his first real step toward power. He had endured captivity, served under a failing regime, and now began his ascent. The careful rise of Tokugawa Ieyasu had begun. Following the fall of the Imagawa clan after the Battle of Okehazama, Matsudaira Motoyasu, now acting independently, found himself at a critical juncture. His small domain in Mikawa faced threats from within and from neighboring powers, yet he remained calm. He sought support from an unlikely source, the man who had just defeated his former lord, Oda Nobunaga. In 1561, Motoyasu forged a formal alliance with Nobunaga. The agreement was straightforward: mutual military support and recognition of each other's independence. As a gesture of trust, Motoyasu sent his son, Tokugawa Hidetada, to the Oda court as a political hostage, repeating the difficult experience he had once faced. This highlighted how fragile and transactional alliances were in Sengoku, Japan. To signal a new phase in his life, Motoyasu changed his name to Tokugawa Ieyasu. The change was more than symbolic. It tied him to a prestigious lineage, giving his rule an air of legitimacy and destiny. It was a strategic move. Though the Tokugawa name would later become legendary, at this point it was still a goal. Ieyasu spent the next 20 years strengthening his position, while Nobunaga expanded aggressively, crushing enemies and transforming central Japan through force. Ieyasu took a more cautious path. He focused on stabilizing Mikawa, implementing land reforms, quelling uprisings, and modernizing his army. His leadership emphasized loyalty, discipline, and gradual development. Despite their contrasting styles, Nobunaga being bold and ruthless, Ieyasu advanced steadily. Ieyasu was cautious and strategic, maintaining his alliance with Nobunaga while supporting him in major campaigns against powerful foes like the Taira clan. He took part in crucial battles such as Mikatagahara and Nagashino. However, their relationship was never entirely smooth. Tensions from their competing ambitions simmered under the surface. Nobunaga was a dominant leader who demanded loyalty, while Ieyasu quietly built his own power, waiting for the right moment to rise independently. That moment came in 1582, when Akechi Mitsuhide, a discontented vassal, betrayed Nobunaga, forcing him to commit suicide during the infamous Honnoji incident. With Nobunaga gone, Japan was once again without central leadership. Ieyasu didn't rush in. Instead, he withdrew, reorganized, and waited, carefully observing the shifting power dynamics. In the aftermath, one man acted faster and more decisively than the rest, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Within days of Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi avenged him and swiftly took control, becoming the new central power in Japan. Ieyasu, still regrouping in Mikawa, chose not to confront Hideyoshi head-on. Despite his ambition and growing strength, he knew he lacked the broad support needed to oppose Hideyoshi's momentum. Instead, he adapted. In 1584, tensions finally erupted at the Battle of Komaki and Nagakute. It was one of the rare occasions Ieyasu directly opposed Hideyoshi in battle. Although Ieyasu's forces achieved tactical success, the result was a stalemate. Rather than prolong a costly war, both sides turned to diplomacy. Ieyasu nominally became Hideyoshi's vassal, but retained his independence. It was a delicate balancing act that he managed well. Over the next decade, Ieyasu outwardly served Hideyoshi while keeping his distance. As Hideyoshi pursued grand projects like the Kyushu and Odawara campaigns and later the ill-fated invasions of Korea, Ieyasu quietly solidified his own position. He extended his reach into the Kanto region, moved his base to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and transformed his domain into a stronghold for future ambitions. Ieyasu also closely monitored Hideyoshi's succession. With no adult heir and his son Hideyori still a child in 1593, Ieyasu positioned himself as a stable, senior figure, ready to support the Toyotomi legacy when the time was right. In reality, he was preparing for a future takeover. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in 1598, he left behind a council of 5 regents to rule until his son Hideyori came of age. Tokugawa Ieyasu was among them, and by far the most powerful. He had waited patiently, followed orders, and outlasted rivals who had burned brightly and faded. Now, with the old generation fading into history, the quiet strategist from Mikawa stood alone among legends, ready to act. The final step toward unifying Japan was close. Following Hideyoshi's death, Japan once again faced uncertainty. His son Hideyori was just 5 years old, and a council of powerful daimyo had been entrusted with protecting his legacy. But Tokugawa Ieyasu had no plans to play guardian to another man's lineage. He quickly began consolidating power, strengthening his alliances, marrying off daughters to key daimyo families, and openly disregarding the council's decisions. Gradually, then suddenly, support began to shift toward Tokugawa. Ieyasu wasn't just the most senior regent, he was also the richest and most politically astute, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, opposition coalesced around Ishida Mitsunari, a court official loyal to the Toyotomi cause. Though he lacked battlefield experience, Ishida was ambitious. He accused Ieyasu of defying Hideyoshi's final wishes and rallied lords to defend the Toyotomi legacy. Many didn't necessarily support Hideyori, but they feared Tokugawa even more. The country edged toward another civil war. In 1600, Ishida launched a preemptive attack to defeat Ieyasu before he could fully gather strength. But Ieyasu, as always, was prepared. He assembled allies into what became known as the Eastern Army, while Ishida led the Western Army. Around 160,000 soldiers were set to clash in the largest and most decisive battle in Japanese history. Ieyasu had one final advantage: deception. He secretly negotiated with daimyo in Ishida's ranks, most notably Kobayakawa Hideaki, offering them land and rewards to betray their leader. On the eve of the battle, Japan's fate would depend not just on weapons, but on timely betrayals. As the two forces gathered in the fog at a crossroads in Sekigahara, no one could truly predict the outcome. For some, it was a fight to preserve tradition. For others, just another chapter of civil war. But for Ieyasu, it was the end game of a lifetime of careful planning and endurance. If he emerged victorious, the dream he had quietly pursued since childhood would come true: a unified Japan under his rule. On October 21st, 1600, the misty fields of Sekigahara became the stage for the final, thunderous chapter in Japan's age of civil war. More than 160,000 troops gathered across the battlefield. Tokugawa Ieyasu's Eastern Army faced off against Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army. The future of Japan hung in the balance. Ieyasu, always a master strategist, carefully arranged his forces, securing his lines along a ridge and positioning loyal allies at key points. But his true strategy went beyond battlefield tactics. For weeks, he had secretly negotiated with several of Ishida's commanders, offering them land and titles in exchange for betrayal. The most crucial of these was Kobayakawa Hideaki, whose defection would decide the outcome. As the morning mist cleared, gunfire and arrows marked the brutal start. The two armies clashed in a chaotic and deadly fight, neither gaining the upper hand. Blood soaked the field as samurai fought in frantic, violent skirmishes. Ieyasu remained composed, waiting for the moment he had orchestrated. That moment came in the early afternoon. Kobayakawa, with thousands of troops, still hadn't joined the fight. Ieyasu, losing patience, ordered his musketeers to fire on Kobayakawa, not to attack, but to send a message: act now or be destroyed. Kobayakawa responded. His forces suddenly turned against the Western Army, attacking Ishida's flank. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Panic spread, formations collapsed, and other hesitant commanders joined the betrayal. What had been an even battle turned into a massacre. Ishida fled but was soon captured. Many of his allies were executed, and the survivors lost their lands or were forced to bow to Tokugawa rule. The Eastern Army's victory wasn't just due to strength in numbers, but to perfect timing, manipulation, and psychological dominance. The Battle of Sekigahara wasn't merely a military triumph. It ended the fractured Sengoku era. Ieyasu had crushed his last major opponents. He didn't just win a war, he claimed control of Japan. Now nothing stood in his way. The long-contested seat of power was finally his, and all that remained was to make it official.